the Russian ruble lost almost all of its value in a single year. Not 10%, not 50%, 2,500% inflation in 12 months. If you had gone to sleep on January 1st with enough money to buy a car, you would have woken up on January 1st the following year with enough to buy a pair of shoes, if you were lucky. And in the middle of this, a farmer with no economics degree, no bank connections, no foreign contacts, protected his family better than most professors, politicians, and businessmen in the entire country. His name was Nikolai, and what he did in those 18 months maps almost perfectly onto what economic historians find in every currency collapse in modern history. Stay with me, because this story is not just about Russia in 1992. To understand what Nikolai was facing, you first need to understand what the Soviet ruble actually was. For most of Soviet history, the ruble was not really a currency. It was an accounting unit inside a command economy. Prices were set by the state. You could not freely exchange rubles for foreign currency. You could not use them to buy assets on an open market. The ruble's value was essentially a fiction. It's maintained by government decree. Then in January 1992, the Russian government lifted price controls in a single stroke. Prices were supposed to find their natural level, and they did. In the first month alone, average prices rose by 245%. By the end of that year, the inflation rate was 2,500%. Bank savings evaporated. Pensions became worthless. Families who had worked for decades and saved carefully lost everything. Not because they were careless, but because the system they trusted simply ceased to function. But here is what nobody knew at the time. Nikolai had been watching the state radio throughout 1991. He was not an economist. He had no broker, no foreign bank account. What he had was a farmer's instinct for reading conditions, and the conditions were telling him something very specific. Paper was about to become worthless. So in the second half of 1991, before the worst hit, Nikolai began converting his rubles. Not everything at once, not into any single thing. He moved gradually, across 4 different categories, and the sequence he followed is almost identical to what economic historians have documented across every major hyperinflationary episode of the 20th century. The first thing he did was spend. This sounds almost absurd, but it was one of the smartest moves available to anyone in that environment. He spent his rubles on physical goods that would hold their value regardless of what happened to the currency. He bought extra seeds for the following season, spare parts for his tractor, tools, medicines, flour, sugar, salt, canned goods, sunflower oil. He bought 2 additional pigs. Every ruble he converted into physical goods was a ruble that could no longer be destroyed by inflation. Economic historians who have studied hyperinflationary episodes from Weimar Germany in 1923 to Zimbabwe in the 2000s to Venezuela in the 2010s consistently find the same pattern. The people who came through best converted paper into tangible goods before the worst of the inflation hit. Not perfectly. Nobody times it perfectly, but early enough. And this is where it gets shocking, because the second thing Nikolai did sounds like a joke. He converted some of his savings into vodka, several cases stored carefully. He never drank most of it, traded it. Throughout the Soviet period and deep into the 1990s, vodka functioned as a parallel currency in rural Russia. It was portable, durable, universally desired, government produced at consistent quality. You could use it to pay for labor, trade it for fuel, exchange it for goods at predictable ratios. This is not unique to Russia. In colonial Virginia, tobacco and rum served the same function in parts of interwar Germany. Similar informal currencies emerged. In different crises across history, cigarettes, nails, small ammunition, coffee, diesel fuel, all filled the same role. What Nikolai understood intuitively, and what the academic literature confirms, is that when a formal currency fails, the informal economy does not disappear. It reorganizes around different units of account. The people who survive best are those who hold some inventory of whatever the informal economy needs. The third thing Nikolai did was the one his grandfather had told him about. He held dollars, sewn into the lining of a coat, hanging in his shed. His wife knew, his eldest son knew, nobody else. Approximately $200. In the winter of 1991 was a meaningful sum in ruble terms. By the spring of 1993, after the worst of the hyperinflation had passed, those same $200 represented something far more significant. The dollarization of the Russian economy in the early 1990s is one of the most dramatic informal currency substitutions in modern history. By some estimates, by 1994, there were more US dollars circulating inside Russia than in any country outside the United States itself. Russians were holding dollars under mattresses, coat linings, in jars buried in gardens. Not because they were financial geniuses, but because they had watched what happened to every form of paper wealth denominated in rubles, and drawn the obvious conclusion. But what happened next? Nobody expected. The fourth move Nikolai made is the one that gets the least attention. He kept quiet. In the Volga region in 1992 and 1993, there were real incidents of theft and extortion directed at anyone known or suspected to have dollars, gold, or significant food stores. This is not unique to Russia. Historical accounts from Weimar Germany describe the same dynamics. Accounts from Zimbabwe in the 2000s describe them. One of the consistent findings in the study of economic collapse is that conspicuous hedging is dangerous hedging. Nikolai never talked about his dollars at the village cooperative. He never showed his stores of goods. He continued to present himself as a man who was struggling, because in relative terms, everyone was struggling, while quietly maintaining the cushion that would let his family eat, keep their farm functional, and preserve some real monetary value through the worst of it. By 1995, the Russian government had managed to stabilize the ruble to some degree, but the trauma of the early 1990s permanently changed how ordinary Russians related to money, banks, and the state. A survey conducted in the late 1990s found that a significant portion of Russian households still kept the majority of their liquid savings in cash dollars at home, rather than in bank accounts. Years after formal stability had been restored, the scar was real. Here's the part of this story I want you to hold on to. Nikolai was not special. He was not ahead of his time, did not read the right financial blog or have the right connections. He did what every generation of his family had learned to do when the currency situation became uncertain. Convert paper into things. Maintain the ability to produce and trade. Hold some portion of wealth in a form the government cannot inflate away. Keep quiet about it. His grandfather had done something similar in the 1920s. His great-grandfather, almost certainly, had done something analogous before that. This knowledge, what you might call financial survival knowledge, does not get preserved in institutions. Banks do not teach it. Governments do not encourage it. It passes through families, informally, imperfectly, only to those whose families were paying attention during the difficult times. You are not facing Russian hyperinflation of 1992. The situations are not identical, and I am not going to tell you they are. But you are living in an era of structurally elevated inflation in many parts of the world, of currency debasement by major central banks at a scale without modern precedent, of genuine uncertainty about the long-term purchasing power of money. You do not need to believe a catastrophe is coming to find Nikolai's approach useful. You need only to believe, and the historical record strongly suggests you should, that financial systems can go through significant disruptions, and that the people who navigate those disruptions best are almost never the ones who reacted at the last moment. They are the people who had already, calmly and without drama, taken a series of concrete steps, not because they panicked, because they paid attention. If this story gave you a lens you did not have before, hit like. It helps more people find this channel. Comment below with one word. If you had rubles in 1992, what would you have converted them into first? Next video drops this week. You do not want to miss it.